imagine a way out of inequality, pollution, human rights violations, and any other assortment of dread inducing buzzwords. But maybe we just aren't being creative enough. In a 1967 sci fi novel, Lord of Light, there's a group of revolutionaries, way off in the future, who want to take their society to the next level. They believe they can do so through swiftly altering the social attitudes people carry about technology. Instead of fear of the unknown, we should put our foot on the gas and see where it takes us. They called themselves accelerationists. Accelerationism is the real world belief that technology and capitalism should be sped up. This is either because they genuinely think this is a good idea that will result in some sort of techno capitalist utopia, or because there is simply no alternative. We can either prolong our suffering or go right through it. Hence, they push for deregulation, the merging of the digital with the human, and the overall rejection of the belief that we can somehow control progress. Current accelerationist circles have even argued that the election of Trump, a hyper-capitalist, anti-establishment figure, is the first true manifestation of their movement in politics. Where did this begin exactly? Many point to the mysterious philosopher and writer Nick Land as the source of the movement. Land was a young professor at Warwick, already known for his eccentricity, love of Nietzsche, and his propensity for climbing over chairs. He would tell his lecture audiences that he worked in the field of the collapse of Western civilization studies, and he would also get extremely high in his office. Reading everything he could get his hands on, Land quickly consumed all of Deleuze and Guattari's work, including Anti-Oedipus, as well as the work of Lyotard. These thinkers emerged at a time when the leftist project appeared futile. In Anti-Oedipus, Guattari and Deleuze wrote about the left's need to acknowledge the ability for capitalism to liberate and oppress, rather than simply oppose it at every turn. They suggest embracing the anarchic tendencies of the free market in order to go still further in the movement of the market, to accelerate the process. Lyotard would also write Libidinal Economy, which praised capitalism for its naturalness and that even its most oppressive aspects were enjoyed by its victims. Land was inspired by this thinking and began to form his own philosophy. In 1992, he suggested that capitalism had never been fully unleashed and was always held back by politics, a practice he considered primitive, the last great sentimental indulgence of mankind. He began to form this idea of embracing the apocalypse through acceleration. Land saw capitalism as the motor of modernity, above and beyond any individual movement. This is strengthened by hyperstition, which is what he called the action of successful beliefs and ideas that, once emergent in the culture, give rise to their own reality through apocalyptic positive feedback loops. They are fictions that make themselves true. Capitalism is perhaps the greatest at this through, for example, forming consumer desire for things that aren't actually essential. Capitalism, he adds, reduces the importance of the self. This was an idea that Land was quite comfortable with. As he argued, the individual has now become less important than the system they lived within. The human experience is becoming increasingly irrelevant. This is evident in an early speech of Land's called "Let's Put the Rat Back in Rationality." He argues that we should view death not as a particular event in an individual's life, but rather through the view of the rats carrying the Black Death across Europe, as a world encircling swarm with no coordinates or individuation. When asked if he is telling us to abandon the human experience, he simply responded that it's worth studying but shouldn't be prioritized.
Are you sick of having issues with your webinars, wasting tons of time on troubleshooting with attendees? If so,
Today's video is sponsored by Endel. For a lot of my viewers, it's the first month of school, and I'm sure, like me, you've felt just how hectic and stressful keeping up with assignments and deadlines can be. Every day really feels like an endless barrage of tasks and readings mixed with trying to balance my social life and basic health. This has left me pretty stressed, and I've had some serious difficulty focusing. But thankfully, I found Endel, an app that is backed up by neuroscience patented technology that creates personalized soundscapes to get you back on track. How does this work exactly? Endel reacts to inputs like time of the day, weather, heart rate, and location in order to create a custom soundscape for whatever you're trying to do. Endel helps you boost productivity by helping you concentrate for longer periods of time, relax you through calming your mind to create feelings of comfort, and most importantly for me, sleep by soothing you into a deep state of rest and relaxation. If you're in need of some semblance of focus, then head on over to the link in the description and download Endel today. The first 100 people to download Endel will get a free week of audio experiences. Land's thought was only further encouraged by new arrivals at the Warwick Philosophy Department, who equally rejected the optimism of the Californian ideology, which envisioned a world in which new technology unlocked human potential, as well as the traditional leftist view of humanism and rights that pervaded humanities departments. With the help of two young lecturers, Mark Fisher and Seti Plant, they formed the Cybernetic Cultural Research Unit, or CCRU, which operated within a single office in the philosophy department. The CCRU listed these now commonly discussed, but at the time quite niche topics, as their general discussion points, and they would regularly produce cryptic articles with invented terms and convoluted messages. For example, the article Swarm Machines discusses situationists, carbon dating, and describes jungle, an intense genre of electronic dance music. They would also host virtual futures, conferences that acted as a performative way to reject the common discipline and formality of university lectures. For example, in one, Land simply laid down in front of an audience and croaked into a mic while they played jungle. An audience member reportedly stood up and said, "Some of us are still Marxists, you know," and stormed out. As time passed, the CCRU became more and more despised. Land would leave the department and continue the work of the CCRU above a spa body shop. There, the group drifted from accelerationism towards the occult, a move likely inspired by their abusive use of amphetamines and alcohol. They would move into the Satanist Aleister Crowley's old house and spend the nights drawing satanic diagrams on the wall. After several mental breaks, the members, including Nick Land, disappeared from the public eye, and the CCRU was officially disbanded. The first half of Nick Land's life is still considered to this day to be a radical extension of leftist thinking. Members of the CCRU, such as Mark Fisher, had continued their work with great success. For example, Fisher would go on to establish a theory that continued to argue for the acceleration of capitalism, but suggested it be channeled towards an altered modernity, based on automation, reduced working hours, and UBI. Land, re-emerging in China years later, would criticize this left accelerationism, stating that the notion that self-propelling technology is separable from capitalism is a deep theoretical error. That's right, Nick Land moved to China. There, he has since appeared far more pro-government and has gone on to write that China is a fundamentally accelerationist society fixated on the future and speed. More significantly, Land has expanded on his views of accelerationism through his piece entitled The Dark Enlightenment. In it, he argues that freedom is incompatible with democracy and that there is no value in democracy left. Instead, he pushes for a post-libertarian future which embraces authoritarianism. Specifically, he wishes for an ideal state that can be considered to be a capitalist monarchy or GovCorp, in which the state is controlled by an authoritarian CEO who manages the state through what Land called rational corporate governance. What about some semblance of human rights or rule of law? At this point in Land's career, such concerns are seen as a hindering to acceleration. Egalitarian policies slow us down when, instead, we should be rushing towards what Land calls the techno-capitalist singularity. This anti-egalitarian embrace has united Land's current ideology of what he calls neo-reactionism with the alt-right. Neo-reactionaries tend to believe in the replacement of the modern nation with authoritarian city-states that value genetic fitness and intelligence. Such an advocacy for what has sometimes been called hyper-racism, or the belief that some groups will fare better in modern conditions than others and should be accelerated out of existence, has been seen as obviously controversial and hateful. Nick Land insists that the opportunity for viable ethno-supremacist politics disappears into a logical abyss. What to make of Nick Land? It's rare to hear of someone so brutally honest about the state of the world and the future. It's also equally rare to hear of someone who appears to embrace the speeding up of everything that is popularly considered to be bad, or at the very least, concerning. And there's a peculiarity to Land's tone, so comfortable with disregarding the human experience and the individual, that leaves one uncomfortably in agreement with the idea that the human era is drawing to a close. His thoughts drift between crude, especially when describing race, to uniquely insightful, such as when he discusses the implications of capitalism on the self. Accelerationism has found support in environmental and Marxist circles and has also been blamed for white supremacist attacks and informing Steve Bannon's worldview. Perhaps Nick Land is the perfect representation of that dark, self imploding subpsyche lingering within all movements that struggle to understand, to advance, to hope in a world of speed and transformation. Sometimes it's freeing to know that we can just stop trying and simply let go of the wheel. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Hey guys, welcome to the Sisyphus 55 podcast. Today we're with Mistyverse, another philosophy YouTuber who makes really, really great content. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi. Well, firstly, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here on the Sisyphus 55 podcast. But yeah, I'm just a YouTube creator who makes short philosophy videos that try and weigh in on the meaning of existence and life and things like that. So yeah,
Yeah, today you just did one on the self.
yes, that's correct.
Yeah, no, definitely check out his stuff. Very interesting. This video is brought to you by the Ridge Wallet. It's light, sleek, and industrial. It doesn't fold or awkwardly bulge in your back pocket, and it seriously changed my whole pocket situation. Most people are still using wallets designed in the 90s, carrying around old receipts, pictures of their ex, and gift cards in an unorganized mess. Not the Ridge Wallet, though. This wallet holds up to 12 cards, plus room for cash, and there's over 30 colors and styles, including carbon fiber and burnt titanium. The durable material means each wallet comes with a lifetime warranty. You could buy this one wallet and carry it for life. If this wasn't enough to win you over yet, check out their 30,000 five-star reviews. The Ridge team is so confident that you'll like it that they'll let you test drive it for 45 days. You can send it back for a full refund if you don't love it. Get 10% off today with free worldwide shipping and returns by going to ridge.com/Sisyphus. That's ridge.com/Sisyphus and use code Sisyphus. Link in description. So today we're going to talk about something that's kind of an extension from the last time I was on your podcast when we were talking about the good life and how to live a meaningful life.
Yeah.
It was more of a normative discussion. Today we're going to talk about why do we do anything at all? What kind of pushes people? And before we get into that, do you kind of have any sort of personal theories as to why we decide to do anything at all?
I mean, it's a really good question because if you look at it from the kind of Albert Camus perspective of absurdism in a universe that's so sort of apparently meaningless, it's a real puzzling question as to why we do anything at all. What's the point of doing anything? Um, but I personally tend to think that the absurdist route can be a little bit hopeless. So my personal theory falls more in line with existentialism and Jean-Paul Sartre. So he said that existence precedes essence. So we exist. That is the bare fact of the universe. We are here, and it's from there that we can decide to make our own meaning and come up with what we want ourselves to be. And I think that sort of striving for authenticity is a massive factor. I would say personally as to why I choose to do anything, and yeah, why I choose to do the things I do. Sort of um, knit my own meaning out of the fabric of the meaninglessness of the universe and try and create something out of it that wasn't there before.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I think existentialism, probably more than any other branch of philosophy, provides some of the most concrete
answers, if you can call it that, regarding why we decide to do anything at all. Because you're right, when we kind of peel back the curtains and look at everything for what it appears to be, which is kind of meaningless and indifferent to human existence, it can be kind of weird to come up with an actual reason to get out of bed in the morning to pursue certain goals, because it kind of feels like in the kind of expanse of the universe and in our own kind of impermanent existence, it doesn't really seem to matter as much. And existentialism kind of, accepts all of that for what it is, and says nonetheless we should kind of keep striving, and specifically in the Sartrean existentialist sense, to look for some sort of personal authenticity, and to not act in bad faith.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you see it in the subject I'm studying a lot of at the moment at university is phenomenological psychopathology, and you see it with such cases as like depression. The bare meaninglessness of everything seems to weigh down on you so much that it overpowers you, and it kind of prevents you from doing anything at all, or anything meaningful, or anything that you regard as meaningful. And everyone has had, I'm sure, certain experiences of being depressed and sort of have some idea as to what it's like. Um, but yeah, the existentialist would say, yeah, it is difficult. It's very difficult. But the idea of making uh, a meaning for yourself out of, well, nothing really, I think that's quite a fascinating idea. It's sort of like breaking one of the fundamental laws of physics. It's making something out of nothing. And that something is whatever you really want it to be. I think that's quite a scary idea, but also quite a liberating idea.
Yeah, and could you briefly explain what phenomenological psychopathology is? Because that does sound very interesting.
Yeah, don't make me say it too many times though, because it's a bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the phenomenal aspect of that means how things appear to you subjectively. So phenomenology deals with the kind of structure of human experience and how we relate ourselves to the world. And then the psychopathology aspect is the aspect of kind of disease and disorders. So phenomenological psychopathology is looking at the structure of different mental disorders. And you see
Mm.
things like depression and anxiety and things like this. The literal structure of your world changes. It's not just something that happens inside you. It's what phenomenologists call shared interaffectivity. I always have trouble with
Mm.
that word. It's literally the disease isn't in you, kind of the disease is in your world and literally between you and other people. Um,
Mm.
so I think it's a lot more serious than some people give it credit for because it's literally like your whole world is crumbling down. And of course, there's different types of depression. People become depressed for different reasons. But I think the one we're talking about here is a kind of almost intellectualized form of depression where people are very weighed down by the pure intellectual fact that the universe is meaningless. Um, but yeah, that's the sort of definition that I would give for that.
Oh, that sounds very. I've never heard of that, so it sounds like a very interesting field and kind of a good branch between philosophy and psychology, just in general.
Yeah, definitely.
So just to back up the conversation a little bit, after kind of proposing a sort of, I guess, motivational theory of why an individual would get up in the morning to, kind of in an existentialist sense, to, find personal meaning, seek out some sort of authenticity. Um, just more broadly, the phenomenon of boredom is quite interesting, and Pascal, one of his famous quotes that you see quite a lot ever since we've been kind of in this world of lockdowns and having to stay inside and
Yeah.
so forth. He says, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And that is interesting because on the surface, it makes sense because no one would really want to sit in a room alone. But the question is, why is it so difficult for us to kind of not do anything, to simply just not preoccupy ourselves with entertainment or some sort of productivity or sociality? Do you have any sort of
Um,
uh,
yeah, well, I think you began to touch on it a little bit towards the end of what you were saying there. I think I don't want to sound all like highfalutin and moralistic and everything like that, but I think in the 21st century, we're so used to having everything immediately available all the time.
Mhm.
And so, that there's always a cure for boredom as such with Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. But definitely don't stop watching Sisyphus 55's videos, by the way. That wasn't an excuse. Um,
Thank you.
but yeah, there's all these things on the internet that we can distract ourselves with, and there's always something that we could be doing. But I think the problem comes when we trick ourselves into thinking that just distracting ourselves from being bored with anything is better than just being bored in its pure state.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's yeah. Well, there's a it was a recent study where this quote kind of reemerged from the science journal Science, and it found that people will generally choose to self-administer an electrical shock rather than sit quietly in a room alone with their thoughts. And so that's I think you're right, but there is almost a certain severity to it that it's almost seems like fundamental to human nature that we find it very difficult to be alone um, with ourselves.
yeah. I don't know if there's maybe you know something about this. If there's like a evolutionary story behind it, um,
Mm.
I'm not sure. But this tends to be the reason that I'm skeptical of very utopian ideas where all our needs are taken care of and all we live for is pleasure. Like I've just finished reading H.G. Wells's The Time Machine, and there's
Oh,
this.
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book if any of the listeners haven't read it. But yeah, he travels to the year 802,701, I think it is. And these,
It was good memory.
yeah, well, I have only just read it. Don't give me that much credit. But yeah, the human race, they've sort of devolved into this elfin species where they just live for sheer pleasure. They just eat fruits and vegetables and they frolic around, but they're all kind of really childlike and stupid because they haven't got anything to challenge them and they've
Mm,
got nothing to do. And I think this is where that idea of kind of self-administering electric shocks come from is that we just can't stand nothing to do. And I think H.G. Wells's book is a sort of it's a very dystopian book in that sense because this is what's going to happen if all of our needs are met all the time. So there's
yeah.
yeah,
Like Viktor Frankl's like logotherapy kind of hits on this that he doesn't actually think that some sort of homeostasis being reached, some sort of balance, that's a very good example, like the kind of utopian society and the time machine. That's not actually very conducive to human existence, and it's because he thinks that meaning is kind of arrived through this sort of tension between what we want and what we don't quite have yet.
yeah,
And it's actually not just the fulfillment of things, it's actually the striving towards the fulfillment of things. And I think it also maps closely to kind of Csikszentmihalyi's kind of flow psychology, that we kind of reach a state of flow in between this stage where a certain task is challenging enough for us, but not too challenging. And then it also is it requires like a certain amount of yeah, no, I think it's this kind of balance where it's just challenging enough, but not too challenging. So it's this we kind of need almost like a little bit of existential tension
mm,
in order to not be bored. And then if you live in a society that's completely utopian and everything's uh, given to you and all of your basic needs are filled, yeah, you're right. That's probably not something we'd actually probably want.
yeah. I think it's that's the reason all these psychologists, well, maybe not psychologists, but they always tend to say, uh, if you're reading a book or whatever you're reading that's just above your level, that's the right place to be. Not so massively far ahead that you don't have a clue what's going on, and not something you're just comfortable with. And I think it's this idea that we like one foot in the familiar, and then we also like one foot in the unknown. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's this tension. You got to walk the line between the two, and that's where I think what Viktor Frankl would say our meaning comes from. It's walking the line very carefully between the familiar and the unfamiliar.
hmm But it probably maps on closely to like the hedonic treadmill, and that we kind of only have a certain like baseline of happiness and striving for things after a certain like if we attain a new car that we really wanted, we'll enjoy it initially, and then we'll kind of reach the same level of happiness. There's not a lot of things in our life that seem to actually increase our baseline happiness. We always kind of go back, and once we go back to that baseline, it makes us kind of start wanting things again. So we keep pursuing things, and so it's this kind of, I mean, it's a bit sad because it's this realization that maybe you'll never actually be fulfilled, but finding the fulfillment in the pursuit itself is probably walking the line. Um, is probably a good way to think about it.
Yeah. So do you think our experience of boredom maps on to this sort of baseline state of happiness that the hedonic treadmill talks about?
Um, well, I think that we can actually look at like Schopenhauer
Yeah.
in this regard, because he talks about how there's kind of two poles in human life, and one is boredom, and the other is human need, or like want or desire, and that we're always in the pursuit of trying to capture what we desire. And then once we succeed, we realize it doesn't give us satisfaction like we had anticipated, or after a certain while, we kind of lose the satisfaction. And then at this point, we develop boredom, and then we go again and we pursue it again. So I think that like even before the hedonic treadmill was a concept, Schopenhauer was already very much kind of discussing this association with boredom and this pursuit of happiness.
Yeah. Well, as a pessimist, you'd expect him to be quite hot on that trail.
Yep, yep. So uh, I I do believe that boredom, because there is something very painful about it, but it's very weird if you think about it in the big picture, that we're pursuing these things, and the product is more often than not boredom after a certain while. Like if we're pursuing sort of material things, or um, a certain job position or something like that, after a certain while, even though we maybe have tricked our brains into thinking that it's actually going to lead to a long and meaningful existence, we kind of go back to this sort of baseline, and then we get bored, and then we want to pursue other things. So it would make sense to maybe focus more on the pursuit. And I mean, Schopenhauer's kind of solution was just to be very ascetic and like do nothing and have very little pleasure, and it becomes he quite like Buddhist teachings and kind of
Yeah.
Eastern philosophy in that regard.
So do you think, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think boredom as a concept is more characterized by a lack of something, or do you think boredom is a thing in itself?
Yeah, because I mean, if we're taking Schopenhauer's definition, it's uh, a thing kind of
Yeah.
in its, or no, it's because of something. It's when we experience the worthlessness of existence. Um, so I guess it's kind of a phenomenological like product of that. Um, Kierkegaard kind of takes it as a thing in itself. It's like this terrible thing to kind of avoid at all costs. Um, they both kind of talk about this sort of emptiness and worthlessness. So I guess the way to characterize boredom is um, something kind of a zero sum, something that's characterized by its emptiness, by its nothingness,
Yeah.
and then we're constantly trying to fill it. So I guess it's this vacuum that more or less is seems to be very um, consistent with like an idea of human nature.
Yeah.
But what do you think of? Do you think it's a kind of a product of something, or do you think it's like a state in itself?
I think my personal definition would align more with Sartre, because he was a phenomenologist as well as an existentialist. And one of the things he said was that you can most definitely perceive a lack of something as a positive thing in itself. So I think he gives the example of waiting for his friend Pierre at the cafe, because he visits cafes all the time. And
Mm,
one time Pierre's not there. And it's not just the fact that Pierre's not there, it's that Sartre experiences Pierre as not being there as a positive thing. Um,
mm,
so I would say, whilst we generally assume that boredom is something to be escaped from, we do experience it as a sort of pure state in itself.
mhm,
If not, like inevitably, you do have to characterize it by its relationship to other things. So you characterize boredom in relation to distraction or in relation to productivity or something like that. But yeah, I think your definition of what boredom is probably dependent on how you choose to color it yourself, whether you see it as a bad thing or whether you see it as an opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, because I guess Schopenhauer, it was more of like a he saw it as a bad thing, but kind of a natural thing. Um, and Kierkegaard saw it as a bad thing and perhaps something that he could move from in some state. I would be of the personal opinion that boredom is necessary. I think, especially nowadays, going back to what you said about how we kind of live in a society that's very distractible and constantly stimulating, and it's probably healthy to actually find some sort of comfort in being alone with your thoughts. And I think going back to that experiment about people choosing to shock themselves rather than just sit quietly in a room shows kind of an unhealthy coloring of boredom as like potentially the greatest evil to experience, something that you really don't want to experience. And I don't think that's healthy.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I suppose that begs the question, what do you do when you're bored?
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it depends because I do think that there is kind of two types of boredom. There's the boredom that you plan for, which can be kind of that's something that's a little bit difficult to do, and probably something a bit counterculture.
Yeah.
Is that we do need times to just kind of not really do anything, kind of be alone with our thoughts. So I mean, meditating or just sitting around or just kind of just trying to do as little as possible. That I think is healthy. But then there's also what I think you're talking about, that boredom that the internet goes off, or you're on a really long road trip or something like that, something that you didn't really plan for. And that could be I I generally strive to kind of embrace that and be kind of oh, this is another kind of moment where I can kind of just introspect and like focus on myself a little bit and enjoy the moment. Um, but I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say I also just go on Instagram and like play a game on my phone, and because it is very difficult. One habit that I've been trying to break is that I go on my phone before I go to sleep,
Yeah.
and I know it's not good for me because you're like scrolling Reddit and stuff, and you read all this like bad news or Twitter or something like that, and you get anxious, and you're constantly switching between like articles and posts. It's probably not good for you, like, to go to sleep and you wake up with your phone. You're also, instead of kind of enjoying the few moments in like bed where you're just kind of alone with your thoughts, you immediately go on your phone, check notifications.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, I feel the power of it, like the strength of it.
Yeah. Do you ever
Um,
do that thing where you're kind of just mindlessly scrolling through apps on your phone and then you'll like close Facebook and then you'll open Facebook again, like
yeah,
straight away?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, you really feel like a lab rat, like you're just conditioned to just keep pressing the same like five things. Yeah, it's I don't know. I'm trying to break it. How do you kind of deal with boredom?
Well, I'd be lying if I said I didn't check my phone as well.
Mhm.
I'm trying to become more mindful. Just kind of sit there in the moment and look at my surroundings, take note of what's there, take note of what it feels like to see the things that you're seeing. Because
Mhm.
there's a difference between the things you're seeing and what it feels like to see those things. And I think it brings
Yeah,
me
yeah. No,
great
that's
focus, just kind of no,
well,
yeah, go on, sorry.
like yeah, no, like I think you're definitely onto something there. Like actually internalizing that you're in the moment, like really like forcing yourself into this moment, like to be as present as possible, is such a crucial skill. Um, and I like Wittgenstein. He talked about one of the few times he goes off, and it almost seems a little bit mystical. Is he talks about how kind of the present is like the eternal, and that like kind of life or eternity is kind of given for those who can actually live in this like eternal now. that can actually like fully embrace this present moment for all it is.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful way to look at it, I suppose. Because, I mean, no matter how mundane your surroundings might be, you'll never see that again. There's only this one moment right now, and then it's gone. There's always
Mhm.
like fresh slices of present being added to the past, and the past always grows, and the future's always there yet to come. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's nice just to sit there and just breathe and feel what your body feels like inside, feel what the environment feels like, what it feels like to you. Yeah, I think it can be quite relaxing.
Yeah, no, so I think we can both agree that boredom is a constructive experience, and it's probably something that um, is a sort of worthy challenge to kind of build up some sort of mindfulness techniques. That it kind of exists and it kind of encourages you to actually maybe fully. Maybe not, because now I'm kind of wondering if there's boredom, but would you consider like someone in deep meditation not doing anything? Would they actually be bored? Because what we might be talking about is this sort of vacuum in which, and maybe not a very pleasant state, that we're bored and we're kind of anxious to do something, and that focusing on the present moment is still an escape from this boredom. Because boredom kind of seems like a sort of halfway place between full present moment and this sort of anxious uh kind of sense of needing to do something, and this sort of dread to just fill your mind with anything.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good point. Because, I mean, if you're like meditating, for lack of a better word, then you're doing something, you're not bored, are you? Um,
Hmm.
yeah, that's a good point. That's really difficult. Um, I guess it once again depends on how you define boredom. I mean, I guess like you said, if you're in the middle of a long road trip or something, or you find yourself with a stretch of time and there's just nothing to do, um, I guess letting your mind wander doesn't really uh, count as meditation if you're not paying sort of attention to it. Just kind of
Right.
just existing.
Yeah. And I mean there is a lot of accounts of like I mean like Nietzsche and Kant, they loved just taking walks, and they weren't really meditating, but they were letting their mind kind of just wander. And that does seem kind of like a default state of ours. Um so maybe that's kind of that's kind of the more positive side to boredom, is that you can kind of end up in these trains of thought that you wouldn't normally arrive to when you're deep at work, or even when you're meditating, because you're right, meditating, you're very focused on the present. You might experience some great positive affect. There is something kind of anxious, and maybe because of this anxiety, there's some creativity that comes from being truly bored.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to go into discussion about creativity or anything, but I don't know if it's the same for you.